I can start with the little demo. I also have to apologize because the amount of time I spent preparing this is, well, basically the time that went into making the slides you're currently seeing. This is the only slide. This is the one and only slide that I have for this. The next slide is already the coffee break, so there are no slides anymore. Everything from here on out is basically, well, freestyle. And I do have one notepad somewhere that I hopefully have not closed, because otherwise this will get somewhat inconvenient. No, it's still here. Okay, everything is here. And yeah, so I'll just start and ramble on about things that may or may not be relevant for you when you're contributing. Let me close down the slides for now and open up a terminal, which is everything we need. So I'll make this a little bit larger so people can actually read. I will open up, what else will I open up? This is always good to have. So the Manim community GitHub thing, we'll use it in a little while. And so the two things that you will need for this part of the session, if you're really starting to think about what do I have to do to contribute for the first time? So what are the steps that I have to make in order to get some changes that I want the library to have in order to make them, make some improvement somewhere? What do I have to do? Two things that you will need for that is, one, you will need a functioning installation of Python. So if you type Python, then that might not necessarily work in your terminal, but in my case, it's Python 3. I have a Python interpreter that's running and working and doing what it should be doing. And the other thing you will need is Git. So Git needs to be installed. These two things are sort of necessary. Everything else we can sort of work around or install while we are going. Assuming that you have these two things installed, then in order to get the source code of the library, and please stop me at any time if in case I'm going too fast, or if you have some question in some particular spot of the presentation. Just making sure. Yeah, okay, everything's fine. So what do? We go to some directory that I do not care too much about. I have one right here for demos and stuff, which I call Playground. You can, of course, also use a directory you care about. So I actually, my proper copy of my development copy of Manim that I use all the time is in my code directory. But well, we're getting lost in semantics a little bit. I'm changing into the Playground directory, and in here you will see there's no Manim directory yet because I just deleted the one that I had. I made some experiments before the talk, I'll admit. So what do we need to do? We need to get the source code from somewhere. All of the source code of Manim is hosted in our GitHub repository, which you probably have seen before. I'll post a link in the chat. This is this here. And also in my chat, actually, so one thing. Whoa, way too fancy. Way too fancy. And all of the development happens basically on GitHub. So in order to get a change that you want to make into the live version of Manim, you will need to interact with GitHub in some way, which in particular means you need a GitHub account. So for a first step, if you don't have that, or well, first is maybe not really true anymore because we already did some things before, but one of the first steps, make a GitHub account, and then you can fork this repository. So the way things work on GitHub is there is like our central Manim community Manim repository, and every time you want to make changes, you can't just directly push onto our main branch because that would be insane if we did that. If everyone were able to push to our branch, then this could also cause vandalism, and I don't think things would be working for very long in that sense. So we have a set of people, in particular the moderators here, or some of the moderators here actually, who have a special role, the organization admin. These have administration permissions for the GitHub repository. I'm one of them. So I'm one of the main maintainers of the library. And apart from these, we have also our community developers. So those are the people with the blue names, basically, the dark blue names in our Discord. All of those, more or less, I think, should have write permissions to this particular branch. So to this particular repository. So all of them are allowed to, if I go to pull requests here, so there are a bunch of open requests for changes already. We'll discuss these a little bit in more detail a bit later. There's one this is one that has been made automatically. It says some sort of version upgrade, okay. And as an admin, I could just say, okay, merge it, and then this is included in the main version of the library. I don't do that right now because that causes things to happen, and I don't want anything to happen right now. Okay, so we have that. This is where the development happens, and this is also where the source code and everything is located at the moment. So you can check, actually, there are a bunch of directories. We'll hear a little bit more about the structure of Manim in the next session. I won't go into details, which is in what files exactly. I'll open up one or two as soon as we have everything on our local machine, just for good measure, basically. But we'll hear more about the structure in the next talk then. Okay, so this is this. And now I want to get the code, actually. And how do I do that? There is this code button here, which says I can clone the repository locally, which I'll do. In case you have just made your GitHub account, it's likely you have not added an SSH key yet, which is a very convenient way of authenticating against GitHub. If you don't have that yet, probably the HTTPS thing will be highlighted anyways. I copy the thing, and I just go and type git clone, and I paste the link. I can actually make this a little bit broader. So there we go. Can you read the terminal text well enough, both in my stream and on Discord? Yes, excellent. I'm hitting enter. Something is happening. I've just downloaded Manim. Great. Let's look at it. So I have, actually I could open this. Actually, I could open this in the Explorer. People are probably more familiar with that. That did not work in the way I wanted it to. I tried this before, actually. Ah, that works. I'm not sure I can make the Explorer larger. Well, we have downloaded the directory of files, and those are exactly the same files that you can see online listed in our GitHub repository here. So I can actually also do it in the terminal, which is change into the directory, and then I list all of the things that we have in there. And you can see, okay, there's a bunch of stuff. Some files, I don't mention all of them, right? The README is actually the one that's being rendered down here. So this is what is contained in the README. Something is broken in the README. Excellent, we should fix that. And yeah, so that's the one file. There is one directory which is called Manim, which will be important because it contains all of the source codes of the library. We have a directory docs, which contains the documentation in some sense, more of the documentation infrastructure actually, and not the documentation itself, which is mostly bundled with the source code together. And we have a directory tests where tests are located. We'll talk about those too in a little bit. So I've just downloaded the library. I cannot use it yet, and that would be the next step to make sure that everything runs well, actually. So how do we do that? We ideally set up some sort of virtual environment where you just have your Manim development stuff. Because if you install Manim into your global Python installation, then installing things into your Manim thing might mess up something that's required for a global installation, and vice versa. So usually I like to have a very clean working environment, and there are two ways of doing that basically. The one way is the normal way. I'll show you how that would work, but it's slightly inconvenient. I'll say that immediately. So that the first way I'll show you is not the way you're supposed to do it, but it's something that's convenient and works without installing, well, extra project management software. The way I'll show you is you do the following. You create a virtual environment directly from your instance of Python. So what you can do is you can say Python -m, which means that you want to call some sort of module in Python. The module I want to call is named virtualenv. Then I give I specify the path where the virtual environment should be created. I usually like to use a folder called .venv. And then, because I'm very fancy, I'll specify the prompt, which you'll see in the terminal, that's displayed in the beginning, so you made aware that which virtual environment you're in, actually. And I'll call this ManiMeet. And I forgot that I should type Python 3. There we go, it did something. Created virtual environment. Reading a little bit is usually helpful in figuring out what your machine is doing currently. So we have created one. It's not activated yet. You can see there's no mention of ManiMeet anywhere. How do I activate it? Well, on macOS and Linux, you usually you write a dot, then you make a space, and then you write the path to the directory. In my case, it's .venv. And in there's a directory bin, and in that directory bin, there's something called activate. And I activate, and then you can see I'm in my virtual environment now. There we go. Some level of proficiency with working with the terminal is required when you want to do want to do development like that. I'm quite confident, however, that most people can figure out things somewhat easily. It's mostly remembering some commands that you've seen 1,000 times before, and then with time you actually understand what everything does and how you use things. Okay, so we have the virtual environment, and now in this virtual environment, I can just say, well, I want to install the software I just downloaded. And to do that, I say pip, which is the package manager of Python, basically, install. I pass a flag which is called -e, which means that the installation should be editable. When I make changes, I want to have these changes reflected immediately in my installation. And then I say dot. And then Manim will do something. Or not Manim, actually, Python will do something. You can see a bunch of text scrolling by. That was not enough time to sip on my coffee. If everything went well, in the end, you should see somewhere that Manim has been successfully installed or built, actually. And this has happened in this case, and I can try and verify that by calling Manim. So I can say, for example, Manim version. And it returns Manim community version 0.17.3. Well done. So we have a working installation that worked well, somewhat well. Okay. However, as I just said, this is not the way how you should do things. Because, and this is actually sort of annoying, the development dependency. So there are some packages that you want to have when you develop the library, but not when you run stuff. So if you just want to write scenes and make some animations, then you don't usually need to have our packages required to say build the documentation locally or test the library. So neither of these two things are required from the eyes of a user. So we don't include the dependencies, the packages that are required to run this. So if I go now and say pytest, then my computer will not know what I want to do. Pytest would be the command with which I can use to run the test suite of the library. In this case, I would have to install the development dependencies. And maybe this is a point where we look into one of the files. Let me close this down and open up a new. So usually you will need some sort of editor to edit the source code of the library. I will use Visual Studio Code for that because it's somewhat convenient if I want to show what I'm doing. It's quite verbose in some sense. And it should look similar for everyone, which is another big plus. If I don't know, use my Vim or Emacs, then it's easy to lose people. The one recommendation I will make is if you want to develop Manim on Windows, which you can see I'm currently on Windows right now. If you want to develop within Windows, then I strongly recommend using the WSL subsystem. So the Linux subsystem for Windows. The experience of development is much, much smoother, and things tend to work just a little bit better because of some of the libraries that we use. And well, documentation build, we have I'm not sure whether they're here, but we have people who tried building the documentation on Windows, and it's very, very painful and leads to tons of bugs. I think Mr. Diver was involved in that somewhere as well. Maybe also Leviathan. I remember some people, but I'm not sure who it was exactly. I'm sorry. I'm bad with names too. Anyhow, so I switch to the WSL, so the Linux version of my VS Code. I connect to the Linux backend, and then I can just say, okay, I open a folder, and I want to open the playground Manim folder. This one, show me. And there we go. I'll close these down because I haven't seen that. And this is what you get basically. So we have this folder. We have a bunch of files in there. They are all good for something. Most of them are, at least. I'm sure if you search hard enough, you will find some files that are not used or not really used at all. And I'd be interested in knowing if you find some. But technically, all of these here do something. And I was talking about the dependencies before. The one file that's interesting to look at is the PyProject TOML file, which is basically the root point for the package manager of Python. So it looks at the information that's presented in this file, basically. However, and you can see it says we are installing something that's called Manim. We have some sort of version. We have a description, we have authors, and all of these things you'll find pushed to various websites then. So for example, if you look on well, I don't have to actually just show you. PI, we need this one, and we look at Manim. There we go. Then you see that the information that's presented on this website, sorry for the flashbang, the information that's presented on this website is basically mirrors what is written in our PyProject TOML. So this is something that's synced in some way. Okay, closing this down, back to here. And within this file, that's the thing that's maybe interesting is we also have listed our normal package dependencies. So these are the packages that are required to be present on your system when you want to install Manim. There's a bunch of stuff in there, and we're also looking to we're always looking to get rid of some because the fewer dependencies Manim has, the easier it is to run all sort of systems, and we don't get into too many issues. But currently, I think it's in a somewhat good state of everything. What you can also see is that there's something called Poetry, which I'll get to in a second. And for this tool Poetry, the development dependencies are specified. And there you can see stuff like PyTest. You can see probably where is things somewhere. There it is. So this is for building the documentation, and this is for PyTest is for testing the library. And these things only come bundled with the development dependencies. So the standard way of doing things, if I just say pip install .current directory, it will just install the user dependencies. And there is, unfortunately, because we use this tool Poetry, there's no good way of extracting this list here and telling your package manager to install these as well. But this brings me to the second point, namely, and also in our documentation actually. So in our documentation, we have several guides, and there's one particularly extensive section on contributions. I'll paste this here and here again. In this guide, you will technically find all the information that you need to get started with contributing. However, and that's also part of well, the talk that I'm giving right now, there's so much information that it might be a little bit intimidating. So it's a good idea to have someone guide you through the first few steps. Currently, we are in here somewhere, and you will see that the recommendation will actually be that you install something that is called Poetry. Poetry is a project management, Python project dependency management thingy. There's a question, what about putting them in requirements.txt and just installing them with pip3? That's possible, of course. I could just copy, but I don't want to. And actually using Poetry is the proper way we do things. It makes interacting with the dependencies a little bit easier. That's about the main reason, though. So there's no additional benefits apart from it makes maintaining it a little bit easier. It comes at a cost, though. So I will deactivate my current environment again. What I will show now is the second way to install things. And for that, you need to install Poetry. Poetry is something you can. I already have it installed. So if I go Poetry, it will just show me some stuff. If you try that and have not installed it, then it will show you an error that can't find the command. But it's easy to install, fortunately. You just have to go basically pip install Poetry. So it's a Python package. You can just install it using pip. In my case, it's already done. So I can look at the installed thing. I have Poetry version 1.3.2, and well, it worked out for somehow. The thing that's a little bit annoying if you install things and then you still can't call them. So if I say I've installed it now, but typing Poetry on the terminal still gives me some sort of command error. What you can do with Python packages usually is instead of calling the executable, so Poetry itself, you can also say Python 3-m Poetry. So you call the module Poetry, which most of the time will have the same effect. And in this particular case, that should always work. So as long as you can access your Python executable, you will also have access to Poetry. Okay, so with Poetry, the command to install everything is actually just Poetry install. Poetry install. It does the same thing. However, you will see that it also includes the development dependencies. So if you're using Poetry, it already assumes you want to do some funky stuff, which is why everything is shipped. Also, the thing looks a little bit nicer than the wall of text scrolling by. It's like a little list of things that's being updated live. Kind of fun. Okay, so we have this. And in the end, it should say installed. How did we activate the virtual environment before? We said, well, we had .venv and so on. Now we can do the same thing just by saying Poetry shell. And there we go. In my case, it found that I had the environment and actually decided that it would use that because it's already there and it works well. In your case, it might create a different directory somewhere, and then this thing up front here might say something else, but it doesn't really matter. Okay. We have a working environment, and now we actually have cloned the most recent version from GitHub. So this should be, if I say git log, I should see that someone has fixed something an hour before the talk. Excellent. So this is the freshest possible version of Manim in some sense, which means that we can also use features that the currently released version of Manim does not have yet. So for example, if you go and type Manim check health, which is something we have added recently. It will run some tests on whether your environment that you're currently using, whether this is sane in some sense. And if the environment is sane, so if it finds all of the things it wants, MPEG, LaTeX, DVI, VGM, if all of these things are accessible to Manim, which are required in order to for things to run properly, then it asks you whether you want to render and preview a test scene. And let's try that. Let's see what happens. We render a test scene, and there we go. Well, almost. Time for coffee. No time for coffee. All systems operational. Excellent. So it shows you what happens if it successfully renders well, not really complicated scene. This has worked well, and the feature, this check health thingy, is also intended at some point, as soon as the next version is released, to make the lives of our helpers a little bit easier, because it's often quite difficult to ask the same questions again and again and again. Thanks at this point actually also to everyone who's active in the Manim help channels. It's really well, we do need a lot of help from volunteers, and I'm very happy that people devote their free time to helping others, setting up things, and making everyone able to produce fun animations. Okay. Good. So this is basically the first part of this presentation that I wanted to talk about. One moment, I'll turn on some light. Okay, it's good. The second part, now that we have a working installation, basically, I'll hop back in. Where is my thingy? There it is. So this was my Visual Studio Code that we have already opened in the correct directory. You can see the marker for the virtual environment is not here yet, which means I still have to run poetry shell in here in order to get into the development shell. And there we go. Now I have exit. Now I'm inside of my environment that I can do things. What do I want to do? For example, I could see and check whether the test suite of the library runs. So I can go and say PyTest. Depending on the software that you're having installed on your computer, and specifically the version of the Cairo library, I think it was, maybe it was not Cairo and something. I don't know. So there's some library whose version will tell you whether the tests pass or whether they fail. And on my machine, I have an older version, so everything passes. I think the newer version, something fails. Tests are now being run automatically. You see some weird things happening. The library checks whether all of the things that should happen do happen in the way they should. And in the end, I hope, you can't see it, but the green dot is still moving. There we go. I should probably speed up a little bit. Just see whether the test passes. They should. There we go. In my case, all of the tests passed, and we get some output that tells us how long did the tests take. It's actually quite a lot of output, and it's quite difficult to scroll to the beginning. But we also have some sort of summary, which files are covered how well by these tests, so whether there are still some functions, methods that are not being tested at all. This is listed in the terminal here. And yeah, so this is what happens if you test the library, basically. Just run PyTest and everything will happen. I will skip a little bit of the things that I wanted to say. The next thing that's relevant is the documentation. So I want to tell you, in the end of this presentation, I want to show you how can we actually submit changes to the library. And in order to get there, we'll need to speed up a little bit. So I will show you the thing that the documentation that is being rendered from our functions directly. So, for example, if we go to the reference manual in the thing, we see there's a nice structure of how things inherit from each other inside of the library. And there is one base class which holds everything that is being displayed on the screen, basically, which is called mobject. And in this mobject, which you have certainly used before, we have a documentation of available methods. So things that you can use mobject.something, and then it will do whatever the the method does. Usually, it should at least. And you will find lots and lots and lots of methods. Copy is one, become is one that's being used very often, flip, get center, and so on and so forth. So there's really a lot of things. And for this particular presentation, I already looked at one thing that's not documented at all yet, namely the center method. There's one method which is called center, and you can see there's no information about it at all, which is weird because if we look at the corresponding code, I'll just navigate there now, wait, this is the wrong one. I'll just navigate there now by letting my Visual Studio Code tell me where I should go. The file, that much I know, is called mobject.py. I go there, and now I'm inside of this large file, 3,000 lines of code. And inside of this file, somewhere this center method will be defined. The easiest way of getting there is basically by searching for it, def center. And there you will see, okay, there's a center method. It shifts something by the negative of the center of the object, but there's no documentation for it at all. So this is a prime example of something that could be improved. We could write a little change request which adds documentation for this exact method. And let's do that right now. How do I do it? Well, in order to add documentation, we add scripts for, we add docstrings to these things. So if you look around in this file a little bit, you will see examples where these methods just have this little string directly after the method body and the method header. And this is called the documentation string or docstring. Inside of this docstring, the information for the documentation of the method is presented. Now let's see whether we have some special things. We have some examples that are actually also rendered directly when the documentation is built. So some things that show code, and in the documentation you will find the code accompanied by the output that is produced when the code is run. We have scale to fit with. This is maybe a better example. This has some description. It's a one-line description with a return block. We have another example block. I'm looking for something which maybe has also an explanation of the parameters, but actually we don't have parameters in center, so I don't really need to look at that. So all that I need to do is I add a little docstring. The format in which these docstrings are written is called restructured text. And I always forget how to write it, but there's a well, useful, not so much. I want to cheat sheet because that's, I think it's this one here maybe. No. There's one thing I always find that's really useful, and I don't find, I should have maybe, this one, I think this one. Yes, this one. I'll put it in my chat and in this chat. You basically find all the information that you need for restructured text right there. Where was I? I was here. So the center method should now get a one-line description, and maybe it doesn't need really anything else. Centers moves the center of the object to the center of the scene. And that's it. That's the explanation. I don't think we need to add anything else really. We could maybe add a returns block which says, well, what is being returned. This is an object, so I need to specify the class of it, I think, like this. So I say this is a class which is called object, and it's in the same file, so I add a dot here. And then we say the centered object. All right, we have added something, and now I would like to make a change and push this somewhere. And in order to do that, I'm already towards the end of the time that I want to take, so we'll cut this a little bit short too. We'll see. I need to check whether I can already push to my location that I want to push to. What does that mean? I told you before that when not everyone has write access to our repository. So what you do is you fork the repository, which is the thing that we had here. So you click on this button here, then you will get your own version of this entire repository. And to that version, you have write access. So what you need to check is whether you can access this already somehow. So if you have done this and you ask your local version of Git, have you added this remote already? So this separate version already where you can push to. You can ask that by writing git remote -v. And in my case, I've only added the main repository, which I want to get the changes into later on. But at first, they need to be put somewhere where I have access to. So what I need to do is I need to move this thing that's currently called origin. I move this. This is something that's quite custom to a name that's called upstream. I write git remote move rename origin upstream, and then I add a second repository. You can, in your case, you just go to your name. My name is my GitHub name is bhackle, and then I go Manim. There we go. And I can do the same thing that I showed you before. I get some sort of URL that I have to copy, or I know by heart and can just put it. And I say, instead of git clone, because I don't want to clone it, I already have it here. I just want to add a new reference. I say git remote add, now the thing that's actually called origin, and my version of the repository. And now I can check whether it did the thing that I wanted to. Git remote -v. Now I have two of these bookmarks, so to say. One is called origin, which points to my version of the library, and the other is called upstream, which has the central version basically. So, and what I need to do is I now need to create a new branch to have a separate version of my local repository that I can push then. I usually don't want to have this on the main branch. So let's say git. You can actually do all of these things also here somewhere by pressing on these buttons. I don't know. I just like working in the terminal a lot, and I rather do it here. But you can definitely create a new branch here as well. I'm sure you can probably also edit the remote somewhere. I am just not familiar enough with VS Code to tell you really how to do that. But I suppose it's possible somehow. I create a new branch by typing the terminal git checkout -b. Oh, actually, let's do that. Let's do that in the interface. I click here, I say create a new branch, and I say edit center docs. All right. So the file is already saved. We have a new branch. I can check whether I'm on this new branch already. Git status. It will say I'm on my branch edit center docs.
it says I have some changes that are not staged yet. And what it means is you see this little blue one over here. In VS Code, I can just say, okay, what if I click on this, it will show me what are the changes between the old version, which did not have anything here, which is what this pattern here means, to the new version, which is over here, which is we have added the docstring. Perfect. I exactly want it like that. I click on the little plus to stage my changes. Now they are collected. And then I bundle them together. So I can bundle together multiple changes in several files into one commit. Added docstring to object center. There we go. And now it asks me whether I want to publish my branch. Again, you can either press the blue button here, but I don't like the blue button, so I'll do it on the terminal. I say git push. The upstream should be set to my own version of the repository, which is now called origin, the bookmark, so to say. And the branch that I've called it added center docs. I enter, and it has pushed something. Now, usually you can ignore most of the things that are written here, but there's one very convenient information, namely GitHub spits out an URL that you can follow. Continue to GitHub. It will open up in the browser again, which opens a pull request, meaning that I have my changes that I've made to my repository already. These changes I want to have merged into the main version of the library. I can say, okay, add a docstring to object center. I'll just leave that as is right now. Usually you can't really edit that. There's a very extensive template that you can read. Sometimes it's helpful, especially if you make large changes, to give a little bit more information, especially if you have not really communicated with the current devs before, to give some insight in why and what you want to do exactly. But for this particular case, I just delete everything and say C title, because I'm very, very lazy. And then I can either create a draft pull request or just a undrafted one. The draft one usually means don't look at that yet. I'm working on this somehow. I just want to put it out there, but no proper review yet. In this case, someone could actually look at this, so I'll create a pull request, and it's there. Now a bunch of things happen that I don't really have time to talk about anymore because my talk should have been over 6 minutes ago, but we started a little bit late, so I'll take these 1 or 2 minutes. There's a few tests that we are running. So on every push to also forks and on every pull request that's being created, our entire test suite runs on different machines. So we see we have different combinations. Here are some Ubuntu machines. Here are some macOS machines. Here are some Windows machines on different versions of Python. 3.9, 3.10, 3.11, 3.8. That's the current ranges we are testing. And for all of these, the tests are being run. And as soon as everything passes, which will take a few minutes, which I don't really want to wait right now, you can actually also check even like a preview version of the documentation is being built. Maybe we can take a look at that at the end of the coffee break. But otherwise, I think this is pretty much everything I wanted to show you in terms of how can I get my changes that I've made locally to the library to the main version. The thing that I maybe want to add still is we are always looking for people who can not just help to make changes, but in particular help us to review changes that others have made. So you can see currently we have 41 open pull requests, which means that apart from a few that are automated, like these 3 here and maybe some that are drafted, there are a bunch of people currently waiting on feedback that their changes have made, and we have not so many active developers at the moment. So if you have some time and if you're interested in these sort of things, help in just looking at the changes that people are proposing and maybe testing things out, checking whether they have added tests themselves that are self-explanatory, or whether they have actually improved the documentation. Help in these particular regards is very much welcome. You don't need to belong to an organization. You don't need to have any sort of permissions to do that. You can just click on anything that looks interesting, check whether
what the changes are that have been made. Like I saw one by Uwe somewhere. This one. There's a return value somewhere. He has written a nice overview and explanation. He's not as lazy as I am, and just delete everything. The changes that are being made are very, very minimal, and the explanations that are given are sufficient. I looked at this earlier already, so usually a little bit more care is required. But essentially, this looks good to me, and I can just say, okay, thanks for your changes. I can approve this pull request. And you don't need any sort of permissions to do that. You can do that yourself. You don't need to be an admin. You don't need to write permissions. You can just go here and say approve and say, thank you for your efforts. This looks good to me. Submit. And there we go. Then this is approved. Uwe is happy.
Remind yourself that overconfidence is a slow and insidious killer.
Overconfidence is indeed. I could update the branch, but in this case, there's no need to because there are no conflicting changes that have been made recently. So I can just go and merge it. And now this proposed change of Uwe has made it into the main library and will be part of the next release. Speaking of the next release, there is one that's due actually. We will see when that actually happens. There are some bigger changes that we like to get merged before we do a new release. Mainly improvements to the typing system of the library. We have some information on that in our developer documentation already. Not that much, but well, there's ongoing progress. And Jason says that starting a bit later is fine. Thanks for talking. Welcome. I hope this is helpful in some regard. I know that it's probably if you have done stuff with open source already, then it's probably a little bit too easy. But I think there are many people who like to explain things, like to create mathematical animations, who have not played with open source around too much. And for those are my target audience, so to say.